And welcome to this episode of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. Well, how are you today? I hope you're doing well. Maybe you're taking a little bit of time for yourself. Maybe you're running some errands and you've come across this radio show. Either which way, for whatever reason that you're here, I want to say welcome to today's program. Today I want to start out with a couple of questions. Have you ever noticed that boys tend to compete and girls tend to compare? This was something that was shared with me by my father years and years and years ago as a father of 4 wonderful children, all of which are different from one another and all of which have strengths and weaknesses, as all children do. I have to say, having 2 girls and 2 boys, it has taught me that my father was 1,000% correct. My boys are always competing. They're competing to see how fast they can go. They're competing to see how far they can jump. They're competing to see who can make this better than the other brothers. And it's not only with their sibling, it's also with all the rest of their friends. While the girls, on the other hand, are always comparing their nails and comparing their hair and comparing their shoes and their clothes and their boyfriends and this, that, and the other. Now, here's another question for you. Have you ever heard the phrase that comparison is the thief of joy? You know, from a superficial 30,000-foot view, you hear that phrase, and it really doesn't seem to hold much merit. I mean, if I compare this to that, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm less joyful, but I think that that's missing the spirit of the actual statement. The fact is that when we begin to compare what we have to another person's, when we compare what we have amassed or what we have, or just basically any of the things in our life, and we compare that to other individuals, guess what we're going to find? We're always going to find someone out there that has a better set of circumstances. Maybe they have a better set of things than we have. Maybe they have more things than we have. And if you dwell on that, guess what it's likely to do to you? It's likely to deplete your joy. Now, this is a financial retirement radio show. This is a financial retirement podcast. Why am I discussing that comparison is the thief of joy? Well, it kind of came to my attention, even though I've been asked this question literally hundreds and hundreds of times over the last 2.5 decades as an advisor and a fiduciary. How am I doing? But it was especially poignant to me. Last week, I was working with a couple, and this gentleman is a relatively new client. And at the end of the appointment, I think he was just bursting at the seams. He was so intense about this question. And he said, Matthew, I've got X, Y, and Z in Roth money, and I've got X, Y, and Z in pre-tax money, and I've got X, Y, and Z in joint money. How am I doing compared to the average person? And my answer to him was potentially not the answer that he was looking for. My answer to him was, what does it matter? So let me ask you this question. Have you ever thought about how you're doing compared to, say, your best friend? Have you ever thought about how what you have saved for retirement, what you've amassed, how you're investing, your returns? Have you ever thought about your situation, your set of dynamics and results, and how it compares to all your coworkers around the water cooler? In fact, have you ever thought about maybe even within your own family unit, how you compare to maybe your cousin or your brother or your sister? It's natural. It's human nature, I think. And, maybe for men, we like to compete And I've seen men, talk about all the winnings. I've seen men compare their losses. Funny enough, I've seen women compare. And the question I have, is it really healthy for you? Because at the end of the day, what is it going to matter? At the end of the day, does it really matter that your best friend has more money than you? Or that they're investing in a particular way compared to you? Now, if you use comparison as a way to motivate you to do better, to be more productive, to be more efficient, to be more thoughtful, to potentially avoid making mistakes that so many other people make, then I think comparison can have a good byproduct. But if I was to ask you, all right, there's three camps. There's below average, there's average, and there's above average. And you could only pick two of those. Which two would you pick? And I'm willing to bet, I'd bet a steak dinner on it. No one is going to suggest, oh yeah, I want to be in the below average category. All of us aspire to be average or above. You've probably heard the phrase, misery loves company, right? I've even said it myself. Well, I'd rather be average than not be at all, right? Well, when it comes to your retirement, when it comes to what you're currently doing in your retirement to save and to be prepared for retirement, or even if you're retired, what you're currently doing to produce the kind of income that you need and that you want, your situation is going to be vastly different from your next door neighbors. It's going to be very different from your best friends or from your coworkers. And so today I want to challenge the line of thinking of comparison, because I have found that in so many ways it can rob you of joy. It can rob you of peace. It can, in some ways, cause you to reach this point where you just throw your hands in the air and say, well, I guess it really doesn't matter. I thought I was doing well, but now comparing myself to this person over here, I might as well give up. And unfortunately, I've seen that. And quite honestly, it's silly. Quite is silly. So let's talk about personal application, practical application for something like this. Number one, you've heard me say it before that there's really three purposes of investing. We are investing very purposefully for growth, meaning we want to try to grow as much of a lump sum value as we possibly can, because the goal is to pull the money out to build something or to buy something. Could be a new house, could be a big boat, whatever that big ticket item is. But we're investing for growth. The second quadrant is really that we're investing for income. In this quadrant, really, we're more focused on the objective of maximizing income and minimizing risk. Now, I would say that for most retirees, people that are actually in retirement, this is what they focus on. After all, when you think about putting money into a 401k, you think about putting money into a 403b or Roth or whatever tool you've chosen to use to save for retirement, your number one goal was to save that money today so that later on in retirement, when you no longer had the paycheck, you could then supplement your Social Security. You could supplement the pension that maybe you receive. The third area I have found is saving for legacy. I'm investing my money so that I can have maximum money convey into the hands of my loved ones, my children, my grandchildren. This means that I want to be able to focus on minimizing taxation to them. And you know what? Here's what's interesting. Under all three of those scenarios, under all three of those dynamics, there could be a few similarities in the various different tools that you use, but the strategies and how you're applying them, the percentages that you're putting into the various different tools or various different asset classes, they're going to be different from one another. You see, it really doesn't matter what Joe Blow next door is doing or what your next door neighbor is doing. The reality is, are you doing everything that you can to be productive to reach your personal goals, whatever those goals are? I'll give you an example. When I spoke to a client here maybe about 10 years ago, his number one goal was to make certain that when he made it to retirement, he wanted to have as much income as he possibly could. He wanted to have minimum risk, and he wanted to have as much tax efficiency as he possibly could have. Now, he was kind of looking at this from a standpoint of investing for income being his number one goal and legacy being his number two goal. And you know what? Little by little, over the course of 10 years, this gentleman accomplished that goal. He focused very much on making certain that he was doing things like Roth conversions. So he was taking money from one bucket and he was paying the taxes and moving it over little by little into the Roth IRA. Now, to him, this made a lot of sense because he would rather pay the taxes on it today rather than the taxes on it later. And he believed that with the rising deficit, that even today, even with the big, beautiful bill, we know that our deficit is going to continue to go up. Unfortunately, I don't see the deficit coming down. And so his firm belief was that in the future he would see higher taxes, more taxes, higher percentages of taxes. And so in preparation for that, he wanted to do the Roth conversions. But he also did this because he wanted to make certain that if he died, his wife, going from a joint filing person to a single filing person, would not have to contend with things like required minimum distributions and having to pay twice the amount of income tax. So he was very thoughtful. He was very forward thinking in his motivation and in his goal so that he had an objective to focus on. And that's one of the key points here. We want to be very focused on what the objective is. Because you see, you may remember the quick Bible verse that says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." It's funny to me how many people today are investing in 401ks simply because their supervisor has told them to do it. Their friends have told them to do it. But they have no rhyme, they have no reason, they really don't even know what they're investing in. They have no sense of purpose. And let me ask you, is that potentially you? Sit tight. We're coming up to our first break, and after we return, we're going to start to dissect some of these things to help you practically apply your situation so that you can be more laser focused on what that objective is for you. Sit tight. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the second half of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. If you're just joining us, welcome to today's program. Today we're discussing a little bit of philosophical topic. Maybe you've heard the phrase that comparison is the thief of joy. And in the first half of the program, we discussed that when you compare what you've worked hard to save for retirement to your best friend or to your coworkers or to your next door neighbor or to your family, that could make you feel better. But at the same time, if you find somebody that's maybe saved more, saved smarter, saved a different kind of money, invested in a different way, it may not actually help you feel good at all. In fact, it could have the opposite effect. And the reality is that when we think about comparison, especially when it comes to retirement, what does it really matter what the other person has saved? What does it really matter what they're doing? Unless, of course, your motivation for asking that question is to make you better. It's to push you and to challenge you. It's to make you more educated so you're making smarter decisions. Now, oftentimes that can happen. But at the same time, I can say that After working with literally thousands and thousands of people over the last 2.5 decades, I don't see comparison coming out with that kind of a positive outcome. Instead, what really matters is that you are critical to examine your own set of circumstances. And so in the second half, I really want to maybe help you in better understanding some of the 3 variations of investing and why it matters to you that you pay attention to the tools. So let's look at one in particular. Let's focus on investing for growth. If I'm investing for growth, this is predicated upon the idea that down the road, I want to be able to pull out money so that I can maybe build a new home or I can purchase a new home. And the reality is that if I'm going to be focusing on that goal, that objective, I am not really going to be wanting to put money into my 401k, where all of the money is pre-tax, and when I pull that money out, I'm going to have to pay just an absolute ton in taxes. In fact, I'm going to be using the opposite. I'm going to be using post-tax money or tax-free Roth money. Now, your challenge there is that when you save Roth money, the government limits you as to how much you can contribute every single year. Now, today, obviously, it's been indexed up for inflation, but quite honestly, you can only save about $8,000 a year unless you're going to be doing lots of things called Roth conversions. And so the most practical means of money to set aside for big ticket purchases down the road is going to be post-tax money. This is money that's after tax, because that way you can set yourself up to invest in growth things. You can set yourself up so that you can pay long-term capital gains taxes, which are typically taxed at a much lower rate than ordinary income tax. And it's going to give you the freedom to be able to sell everything, take that chunk of money out, and use it to go buy that item that you want. Now, what if your goal was to maximize income? As we've already kind of hinted to, pre-tax money, money that you would save ordinarily in your 401k, your 403b, that's actually pre-tax or tax-free money. And you're going to be saving that specifically by taking money out of your paycheck and putting it into that account. You're going to be focused on growth for a while, but as you get closer and closer to retirement, you're going to want to reduce the risk. And then the big challenge for so many people is, how do you take this bucket of money and convert it into income? Well, that's where all of a sudden you begin to realize that you have a universe of options. Number one, it's going to be very, very important that as you get closer to retirement, if you want income, you need to protect the principal. If you had a big major sell-off in the stock market, that could set you back a long ways. And you may not have the years in front of you to make that back. And so as people get closer to retirement, they want to naturally have way less risk on that money. But then the question becomes, how do you create income? Now, if you've been a listener to this radio show for any length of time, you know that it's very important to understand what people do wrong. What most people do wrong is they save the bucket of money, and then, well, they just turn around and they start withdrawing from the bucket of money. Now, that may sound completely proper, but the reality is that in the 401k and the Roth, whatever's the money is in, when you start taking withdrawals, you're having to sell shares of the funds that you invested in. Well, Matthew, what's wrong with that? Well, let me ask you the question. Have you ever thought about what the number one fear amongst retirees is? It's not the fear of dying. It's the fear of what? And if you said running out of money, you'd be absolutely correct. And you see, every single time, if you've never thought about it, this is so important. Every single time that you're selling shares, you now have fewer shares left. So you see, if the goal is maximizing income, you're going to use a totally different set of tools than the person who's trying to focus on growth for building the new home or buying the new home or the boat or whatever that big ticket item is. In this case, we want to focus on things that are more contractual, things that are more predictable and steady, things that are going to produce for you that 5 and 5.5 and 6 or better interest and dividends every single year. Imagine having $1 million producing $60,000 a year of income and still always having that $1 million. How good would that feel? You see, if your objective is income and you're focusing and using the right tools in the right way, now all of a sudden, you're not below average. You're not even average. You're above average. You're actually better than most people. Why? Because most people have never been taught how to distribute income. They've just been taught you save all you can, and then you start taking withdrawals and you cross your fingers and toes and you just hope that the market continues to do better most times than bad, and you hope that you don't live too long. I'll give you an example. The other day I was meeting with a couple who, prior to coming in and seeing me, they had had a review with their current advisor. And their current advisor was a big proponent of something called the Monte Carlo analysis. Now, this advisor obviously had been handling their accounts for a long time. He was very dependent upon technology, and he really was a big fanboy of the Monte Carlo analysis. Now, having some tools can be okay. But the reality is that when he put in all of the various different instruments that they were investing in, and he looked at the average life expectancy and so on and so forth, he suggested to them that they had an 89.8% potential of success. Now, let me ask you, if you got on a jet plane to fly from here to Phoenix, and the pilot turned around and said, hey, listen, we have an 89.8% probability that we're going to get to Phoenix. Are you going to stay on that plane? Well, if you're like me, the answer is absolutely not. You're going to be making a Wile E. Coyote out of the side of that plane because you're not feeling very good about that. Well, you see, the goal is if we're going to be focusing on income, we've been saving all of this money so we could maximize the amount of income we get to withdraw from our portfolios so we can enjoy the retirement that we want to enjoy. We need to be thinking about risk. We need to be thinking about what tools can I be investing in that's going to maximize that output of income. And by the way, let's not fall for this idea that annuities are going to be the answer. Annuities can be helpful. They can be a tool amongst many other tools. But remember that annuities don't produce real income. Annuities produce a cash flow. Annuities guarantee you have income. But remember that the company is returning your money in that bucket back to you. And the only time that they really have a lot of risk is if you happen to live long enough that that bucket is now empty, but you're still alive, and so they're still on the hook to provide you the income. It's something that we have to be very, very careful to research. What are the tools that we need to maximize the efficiency of reaching our goal? Remember, at this stage of your life, as you get closer to retirement, it's more about investing on purpose than it is investing for performance. Number 3 is going to be legacy. And legacy, let's face it, legacy elicits the idea that you've died, you've passed on. And in this case, if you're really focused on making certain that you're maximizing as many dollars into the pockets of your loved ones, your children, your grandchildren, guess what? Not only are you going to be using a variety of different investing tools, but more important, you're going to be focusing on tax efficiencies. You're going to be making certain that you're not leaving behind to your spouse and to your children, to your grandchildren, a lot of pre-tax IRA money. No, you're going to be focusing on leaving behind post-tax money that's going to receive a step up in basis when you die. You're going to be focusing on Roth money. You see, no matter what your objective is, or even if you have certain objectives for this bucket of money and certain objectives for this bucket of money and certain objectives for that bucket of money over there, I encourage you, if you really want to get a good quality comparison of where you stand today compared to what others are doing, maybe just maybe, taking the time to interview other advisors, other financial advisors and fiduciaries, individuals that have more of a skill set within where you are going. Not where you've been, not where you are today, but where you are going is going to be the number one comparison that you need to make. And in that appointment, you'll be able to compare not only what others are doing to become maximally prepared for that stage of life that they're entering, but it will give you the insight to be able to compare the financial advisor that you work with to the financial advisor that potentially has a better skill set for where you are going. Remember, this is kind of like the Wayne Gretzky thing. I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck is going. This is an important point that so many people miss in today's world of maximum retirement preparedness. I'm Matthew Johnson. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And remember, it's up to you to make today a great day.